Welcome to the Creatives with AI podcast. I'm your host, David, and this is a show where we share insights about the future of artificial intelligence and how it will affect the lives of people working in the creative industries. On today's show, we chat with Professor Steve Watson from the University of Cambridge, where we touch on the transformative role of AI in education, particularly its potential to personalize learning, promote inclusivity, and assist teachers in creating better test questions and designing curriculum. We also talk about the changing dynamics between teachers and students in the era of digital revolution and the debates on the purpose and form of education. We talk about the potential of AI in decision-making within the educational sphere, how it supports diverse teaching and learning styles and fostering critical thinking, and we touch on how AI tools like Grammarly are transforming communication. Steve Watson, an associate professor at the University of Cambridge, focuses on large language model AI's impact on education. He co-chairs the faculty's Knowledge Power Politics Research Cluster and serves as associate executive editor for the Cambridge Journal of Education. He uses methodologies like social systems theory and phenomenology to explore media, policy, education, and teacher professional training. His degrees in engineering and educational studies are from Cambridge, the Open University, and Nottingham. He holds a postgraduate certificate of education from Sheffield, worked in retail, telecommunications, and taught mathematics before academia. As always, links to Stephen's profile and social media will be in the show notes on our website at creativeswith.ai. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you enjoy this educational conversation with Stephen. So, Steve, good morning. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, David.
How you doing?
Pretty good, thank you. It's good to be here.
So I've done the credentials and sort of your formal, kind of qualifications and stuff like that in the intro, but maybe if you just took a minute or two to tell the listeners what you're currently working on, and then we'll sort of take it from there.
Okay. Well, I suppose I could be best described as an interdisciplinary researcher. So I work in a faculty of education, and I entered into that through being a teacher, doing many things around educational research. In recent years, I've been looking at things like social media and effects on policy making, so across a range of sociological issues. And then more recently, my preoccupation has been with the impact of ChatGPT. And at one level, I kind of might understand myself as like many academics wanting to seize an opportunity. I suppose there's an element of that, but also this is very interesting to me because it's a long-time interest in how human beings relate to machines of whatever kind and in an educational context. So at the moment, my research is preoccupied with this. It's around understanding how people make sense of and make use of things like ChatGPT in their work and their lives, its impact on education and how we might deal with that as a society and what that means for a society. I've been immersed in that since the release of ChatGPT on the interface that came out late November last year.
I came across I have no idea how I came across an article in the Faculty of Education News from Cambridge University, but I did. And I think that was the one that was written by, what's his name, Tom
Kirk, yeah.
So that was what really piqued my interest in the beginning and what made me want to talk to you, because I thought you had some really interesting thoughts about, sort of the direction that it was taking. So I guess my first question is, what is the current state of play? You work at Cambridge University, so you're at university level, but what's your view on where we are with education and AI at the minute?
Yeah, I think this has been very challenging for education and businesses alike in responding to this. And I think there's several issues. First of all, is about user uptake, the amount of people that actually started using this. The anxiety about what it is and what it's likely to do meant that organizations, including Cambridge University, have had very limited capacity to make far-reaching decisions about how it's regulated, but have had to regulate in some way because it's important to maintain the integrity of the institution. But it's left the situation where we've got many, many users who are figuring out and understanding and seeing possibilities and also the limitations and things to be concerned about in this technology, who are very anxious about using it. So at the moment, there's possibilities of a great deal of innovation, but at the moment, it's kind of the limits of understanding of the technology and its regulation are just lagging things behind a little bit. But I think, first of all, to add to that, it's the role of how we've understood this in the media has also raised a lot of attention. And I think the story broke really in a lot of collective broadcast and print media was that this would create an alien intelligence that was among us. And this would do very good things or really very bad things. And the motivation really was to try and get some academic voices into this to say, look, it's neither really, really good or really, really bad as a technology. It could get used in good or bad ways, but we need to start understanding what it is and what it can do and how people are using it. And that was really the setup for what we did there, which has had a lot of interest.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's interesting what you said, because in my mind, it always boils down to people. People will be the problem. I think the AI itself is, like you said, it's just a technology. It's a tool like any other tool. Well, it's not like any other tool, but it is a tool at the end of the day. And I think it can be used for nefarious purposes or it can be used for good. And I think there's opportunity for both. I think what's interesting is that a lot of the educators I've spoken to are worried on one level, but I think in kind of it seems to be the lower grades, like secondary school, they're quite worried because those are the kids who, will go out and try and do work with it and maybe pass it off as their work. Primary school students don't really have access to it and the things that they learn. I think AI could really assist with them in with some of those students. And I know that's one of your things where you talk about, but mostly and broadly speaking, educators seem quite positive. What areas do you think that it could be particularly helpful in an educational setting?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I was talking to the Hills Road Sixth Form College. I did a session there with all the teachers there. And while there were, of course, pockets of people who were kind of deeply concerned and were worried about the technology, overwhelmingly the teachers were seeing lots of opportunities. And I think that is across both teaching and learning, but also the administration of their work in helping get some of the documentation that they need in the right forms very quickly. It's very capable of doing that. But in terms of teaching, I think one of the possibilities here, I'd say, is in terms of personalisation, or that's where it's seen, is how an individual's way of thinking about the world can be connected up with other ways of thinking about the world. So, I mean, at one level, we often see knowledge as a single authority, and that's how it's presented. But we don't really want to move to a position where we just say any knowledge is the same, but to see how alternative perspectives are constructed and what might be the basis of them. Seems an important direction in personalising learning and inclusivity. So aspects of that are really around summarising and explaining text in different ways, or helping a student write and develop their own ideas and structure their own ideas for different audiences and for different contexts. So for that, I think it's a huge potential tool for inclusion. I think the real limit at the moment, and this has really been the barrier for me at the moment in wanting to develop things in Cambridge, is just access to resources, because it needs a strategic approach across education. And I think in the UK context, a lack of public investment is making it difficult to make use of the technology. And also, that also includes anticipating the potential problems and trying to understand those and understand how we're going to deal with those when they arise. And I mean, I suppose if we think in a globally competitive world, then, those states that are going to develop it strategically will have an advantage, because this is going to be part of the world, but not necessarily in a way we might comprehend or understand at the moment.
I think that's the worry from a lot of people. It's interesting you mentioned structuring content and written content in particular, and arguments. That's one of the things that I find it most useful for, is summarizing information. And you do have to be careful, because it does have a tendency sometimes to make things up. But by and large, if you ask it about a well-established topic and ask it to summarize something, like you said, it can give you all sorts of different ways to present that information. And I find it extremely helpful to do that, and also to help write outlines. I don't like to use it in practice for like professional work that I need to do.
Yeah.
But I do find it really helpful to say, I need to do a paper about X.
Yeah.
Can you help me? What topic should I mention?
Yeah.
And it'll give you a fantastic outline of a document. And sometimes it comes up with things that I would have never thought of myself. And I'm like, that's genius. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
And it gives me a good thing to work from. And then what I'll do is I'll go and write my content myself. And then I'll put it back in and say, hey, can you make this better?
Yeah. I think that's, and I think that what you highlight is the way in which young learners can even learn to use it and to understand what it's doing, rather than starting with the impression. I think a lot of people are, because of the media hype about it, they wanted a story, so it's fair enough that it is a kind of it is an intelligence. But if young children are understanding that what it is it's a machine that will feed back automatically in different ways, rather than as a source of information, as a source of information, then I think it's more powerful in the way you're saying. I was talking with a group about thinking about using it in creative writing yesterday, and they were talking about using metaphors. And one of the ways of thinking about improving use of metaphors is to say, in this text, there's a metaphor, or identify a metaphor in this text, to suggest 5 alternative metaphors, and rewrite those with those metaphors, rewrite this text with those metaphors in. And you can even do a next level and say, in what ways do these metaphors change the meaning of the text? So you can have quite a feedback loop in kind of fairly detailed pieces of writing, craft the writing, but also try and understand what you mean by things in relation to meanings that exist in text. And those are quite valuable in terms of thinking about. It occurs to me here, this all sounds like we're moving into a very different world of education. And I think that's what we're anticipating, is this shift from knowledge to meaning. As I like to, that's a bit of a teaser, because there's a lot of kind of conceptual thinking under that at the moment.
On the side of my screen here, I have wither knowledge, wither meaning, which is something that you wrote before. So just for people listening, I'll share links and everything, and I'll have in the show notes, I'll have links to the articles and things that you've written on this. So, which you shared with me very kindly before we had a chat, and I have read through that. So ironically, I literally have that on my screen at the minute.
Yes.
I've seen recently a few things, and I might specifically ask you about a couple of topics, but one of the things that I saw around education that I thought was quite interesting is in actually assisting teachers in writing better tests and better test questions. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's an area that can be developed very easily, I think, because I was just thinking in terms of, we'll stick to essay questions. So let's stick to humanities and social sciences. Potentially we can think about that in STEM subjects, but there's slightly different challenge there. But for instance, in setting some questions about sociology of education this year, I can put a series of bullet points about the topic that I was lecturing on, or even, a section of theory, and suggest 5 alternative essay questions that would be suitable for second year undergraduates at Cambridge, perhaps. And then, again, like you were saying, a bit of number 1, some are 3, and the rest sounds a bit silly, but it gives me a little bit further to go with that. But it also can then suggest an outline to answer it. So you can start to develop a kind of, ways of thinking about assessment within that. So, yes, it can be very valuable. I'll just say briefly about STEM. Of course, with mathematical problems, it will answer them perfectly in form, but that factually they may be incorrect, because it's just looking at the patterns. So you can generate problems, but they're not. You might have to look at the answers in a different way. It's very useful for explaining concepts in mathematics. So, you say, explain what addition means and why is it important, and that kind of thing. So Yeah, it's again, it's in that feedback approach, I think, really, is and understanding how to use it in that way.
I wonder what it says about quantum. Explain
Uh,
quantum.
um,
Because nobody seems to be able to explain
yeah,
quantum computing, which makes me laugh.
when you get close to paradox, whether that be through irony or sarcasm or through quantum mechanics or just plain old paradoxical, liar's paradox, large language models like ChatGPT all go a bit wrong. It's like entering a black hole for them. Whereas consciousness, and this is a reassuring Turing test, consciousness will always make meaning with when confronted with a paradox. Will go, so that side of the paradox will just ignore the other side of it just for the purposes, and that's what we do with consciousness. But for a machine, because it doesn't have that consciousness, it leads to very random results, which is an interesting question.
What was the other one? So you touched on it as well about, if you're trying to design a curriculum for a course, or you're trying to design your lectures. So do you actually use it yourself to support in that already?
Increasingly, I support it in many ways. So, I mean, I always start from as much information as I can give it. As much information I can that will be managed by the tokenization, i.e., its capacity to deal with text, as I can give it with examples and any constraints. And then it might involve a few iterations in which I take parts of it and go away for a day or so and think about the thing and go, I want that, that, and that. So it's always with human intervention. And this automation is only the fact that it automatically responds to you. But it might always not be the most useful thing. So how to get it to do more useful things for you is nothing more than an art, really, I think, in so many different contexts. And I think people will develop so specific expertise in this that they'll be able to make a large language model like GPT-4 work for them extremely well. So the answer is yes. And I think part of my research is to see what sort of thing it will do. And my option is just to use like the chatbot GPT-4 paid one, because it's probably the most powerful model available. And I just want to see it in the raw, really. I don't want it mediated by an application. And I want to see how the chat's working. And people who were exploring a few years ago with GP2 told me that was a really interesting process because it just showed all the errors and everything as well when that cycled round. So you got to see a much more under the bonnet. And it's like any tool, whether you are a stonemason or whether you are a graphic designer or an anime designer, you need to learn how to use your media. And, if you want to be creative with it. But I mean, even then, to get it to work for you, you need to kind of develop an understanding of the art of this. It's similar to the art of writing, but in a new kind of way.
It is. And it's interesting that you mentioned that as well, because I think we talked about on our intro call, and I still can't find the original article, but there was one of the professors at Wharton at the business school. They now teach a class in their MBA program on prompt writing for AI. And one of the things that he talked about in the article is that he's learned through starting this class and working through it with, several students, that actually you need to prompt it 5 times to get to a very specific answer that's actually useful. So you start off with hey, I want to talk about X. Then it starts to build a thread.
Yeah.
And so it will come back and it'll give you a summary.
Yeah.
And then you say, that's great. I'd like to know more about why.
Yeah.
And then you just keep going and you keep specifying more and more and more detail about what it is that you actually want.
Yeah.
And as you go through that iterative process, you said it takes about 5 times.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That prompt writing piece, you're absolutely right. Everybody's going to have to. I mean, I'm already much better at it than I was.
Me too. And I think that's the biggest thing to learn. I mean, my first prompts were like, so what's the meaning of life? ?
Please tell me it told you 42.
Yeah. I don't even remember, but it was like, it was this issue of understanding what it could do, really. And I think that is the iterative. And I liked it. What I was thinking there is the times that when I'm working on something and you find yourself, you get in the zone with it, so you're kind of in tune with a series of prompts and responses, and it's feeling productive and it's developing something. Your ideas are being given some structure and a form, and that feels very satisfying creatively. And then sometimes it's just, it's an idiot box. It's just, and you're an idiot box and you just can't work it. And it's time to go away and get a pencil and paper out, or even just go and, go for a walk or something, because, it's true of any technology in that. And I think this is why, the reality of this in many ways is much more mundane than we possibly imagine. I mean, that's, of course, like the stone axe was, an original piece of technology. And of course, we could do that to help with many things, including knocking competitors over the head with it. But it took time to learn and to make sense of it in society and how we should use it and how it should be regulated. And it's the same here. It's a tool that serves society. And it will be used for doing bad things, for constructing information, information that deliberately misleads and exploits.
It's interesting as well. So our very first guest that we had on the podcast is a gentleman named Wo King, and he's down in Devon, and he builds AI tools to support disadvantaged families and things like that. And it helps them write letters and gives basic information and answers questions. And one of the things that he's found from offering training programs, so he does like a weekly training program, I think, for local people if they want to come in and learn about it.
That's amazing.
Is he said that old people and very young people actually use it really well.
Yeah.
Because they just talk to it naturally.
Yeah. Okay.
They just ask it questions and it gives better answers. And they don't get caught up in so much of the detail of it, where those of us who are kind of mid-career.
Yeah.
We were so involved in how, we have to be very specific in what we do. And we have to be, most of the time, we're in this environment where we always have to be correct. And so we almost overcorrect when we ask AI questions. And so we want this super specific answer, and it has to be 100% correct all the time. Whereas other people, they just think, oh, this is cool. I want to know, how do I write a letter to my landlord telling them that I need to move?
Completely. And it is that more mundane. It's interesting you would describe as mid-career. So, I mean, it's kind of this stage of adulthood that we carry the responsibility for knowledge and what's going to be correct or not. So we're heads of families, we're teachers, heads of family, we have a, senior role in families, along with partners or not, about decisions. And I think the crisis that, the thing that many of us have grown up through this generation is the crisis of knowledge, something that we carry the mantle for, the truth amongst fake news now. Where does the truth lie? And so it's interesting. It's likely that it comes out in the experience. We want it, for those of us that think it's important, want to engage with this new technology, but also link that to what was important and significant about knowledge. And there is a grey area between that I think young people tend to get much more easily, because for them, life is all about how they as an individual make meaning, and how that and how to communicate with other young people who are making different kinds of very individualized views of themselves, whereas the middle-aged in liberal democracies are wrestling with the responsibility of it all. Oh dear.
You just blown my mind, because I never really, I mean, as adults and with, leaders of families, like you said, I've never really thought about it as being in charge and responsible for the passing on of knowledge for society. That's
I have to face up to it now and again, but that's the reality of it all. That's whether. So yes, sorry.
Obviously, as an educator, you'll be much more in tune with that. But yeah, I'd never quite thought about it in those words. So thanks for that.
Yeah,
that's That's good. That'll give me something to reflect on while I'm on the treadmill next time. Let's talk about sort of the elephant in the room,
Yeah.
which is, where do you see over, I mean, I like to talk about the next 5 to 10 year window, because I think things are drastically going to change in that time.
Yeah.
AI is very clunky. It's still a bit slow. Doesn't always
Yeah.
do what you want. When we spoke the first time was after the Sam Altman thing. And one of the things that he mentioned when he was talking was that what he thinks is we're going to end up in a federated type system, which means you're going to have one AI that controls the conversation,
Yeah.
but then reaches out to specialist APIs for specialist
Yeah,
topics. So it might
yeah.
go to Wolfram Alpha for
I
mathematics,
think
or
that's
it might
right.
go to a specialist one. And if you want to play chess, it'll go to a chessman or a chess one or whatever. But where do you see the risks coming?
Yeah, I think that, of course, the major ones are, how this can be used imaginatively to exploit or kind of mislead, I think, primarily, because it's very effective at automating the processes that might be used for benefit, but it could proliferate that. And I think it's incumbent really on kind of education to try and very quickly give people a chance to understand what this technology is. And that's an imperative in that. So, I mean, there are issues around, they're important, but they're kind of, I would say, less existential, if there is such a thing as, like data privacy and, things like biases in the data sets. They're things that are ongoing conversations about how and what we use it for, and what it means to train a large language model in contrast to kind of information retrieval systems that we use to, like, search engines. So, I mean, it's probable that if it's read some of your personal details at any time that happen to be public, that it could reconstruct those in a reply to somebody. But the possibility of that is so remote, it seems impossible. So those are I think those, yes, for now. I mean, whenever you have the highly impossible, it becomes a probable. So it could do, but there are questions to ask about, and this, I think, is how we proceed with a deal of caution, which is, I think a lot of the kind of AI leaders are really kind of saying that in many ways. I think some are more extreme in their saying just halt it, and even some of those that are kind of very pro and very successful with it are saying, yeah, we have to go with caution, but the guys who are saying halt it have just missed the bus, that's all. I think the immediate problem is just people having the time and space to think about it and think about how they could put it to use in their work and in their lives, and finding the resources to help them with that is probably the immediate challenge we have. And that is going to exist for some time, because to really get most out of this technology, you have to spend quite a bit of time with it, I think. You've got to work with it over a period of time and quite intensely in different ways to start to understand it. Now, if I'm in a luxurious position where, I can pursue that because it's my job to research technology and education. Well, it is now.
Do you think it'll ever replace teachers?
No, I think they're going to be a key part of this. But the relationship between teachers and students changes all the time. And I mean, this trajectory from the earliest schools where the teacher was the single authority of all text and all interpretation of all text, to this 20th and 21st century transition to a very porous classroom in which the teacher is just but one voice in a backdrop of information, and how then to deal with that. And it's divided education between those, say, who just like rebuild the walls and make them much stronger and make the teacher responsible for being the authority on interpretation of all text, to others who are saying, well, just kick the walls down. Well, I think the answer is somewhere in between, and that's the pragmatic space in which, having been a teacher, that we exist. We try and keep up and try and include things in the classroom and take in different viewpoints and perspectives, but also try and maintain that connection with existing bodies of knowledge and how we understand that. But that's a dynamic process. In And because the young people, you've got that contradiction that they're young and developing, and we're trying to help them develop to be individuals and autonomous individuals. At the same time, we're also protecting them in that process as well. So, but in many respects, they're ahead and behind because of that. So education, as always, is the site of many contradictions that we solve by the practices of teaching that maintain a level of continuity. So classrooms look a bit the same as they did in the 16th century, really, but with more gadgets.
How long have you actually been teaching, like actively kind of working with students in a classroom setting?
Since 2000.
Okay, so that's a really good window for the next question, which is, how have you already seen education change from then until now?
Yeah.
Because I imagine in the 2000s, that was still, mobile phones didn't exist in the early 2000s. I think the iPhone came out about 2004. So that was a very different, and I'm old enough to remember before computers at all. We didn't even have computers in school when I was in school. But how have you seen it change? Because obviously there will have been a massive change in students and the way you teach students and the way you interact with them just because of the technology that's available. Because I guess students now come to class with laptops and mobiles and everything. So I'm interested to see, what are your thoughts on sort of what it was like then versus what it is now?
I think the one thing I'd observe, even though media and technology has changed dramatically on the outside, is the remarkable continuity. So if we were to step into a maths classroom in 2000, it wouldn't look so different from many classrooms in 2023. But there has been a lot of changes, So at that time, there was just probably the calculator and, a few there's certainly a few computer rounds, but they weren't heavily integrated into education. Then came the interactive whiteboard, and they were huge. And so these become features of education rather than directly influenced it. But education responded by negotiating a way of integrating these into what they already have. So, the laptop becomes a supporting technology with various bits of application. The interactive whiteboard effectively is an electronic blackboard, which sometimes isn't as good as a blackboard, especially if the sun's low on an afternoon in the winter. But they opened up the possibility of kind of sharing multimedia presentations. So it's the continuity in relation to these rather than the fundamental changes to pedagogy. But that doesn't admit there's a lot of negotiation that goes on in how that happens and how students are in that and how devices are accepted and included in that. But it's always at the periphery and being regulated in rather than saying, we fully embrace this technology. That's quite rare. And, that's just a long feature of education about how it maintains some kind of integrity by reference to what it already does. And it's interesting how teachers learn to be a teacher in that. It's part of becoming that community that's constantly deciding how it does things on the basis of how it already does things, which is its continuous thread. But there are always disruptors to that. There are always people that change that and do things differently. But I think the most extraordinary feature is really how public polarized debates about what education should be has become an extraordinary feature, as if it can be reduced to some very simple arguments like that.
That's my next question. I guess I'm curious, are the students, do you feel, less or more prepared now than they used to be, to considering that they have technology? So, who was it that said, was it Einstein or someone that said they don't remember anything if they can write it down?
Yeah.
There was someone really famous who talked about that. And he's like, well, if I write everything down so I don't have to remember it, so I can think about other things.
Yeah, I mean, the most important feature of memory is the capacity to forget, because it is a highly selective thing, memory. But that being said, I think, first of all, to answer your question, I think student preparation for university have changed in relation to how they use technology in both, progressing through education and supporting their learning at university and understanding the social environment they're in. So that's a different kind of preparation. But the other observation I often make is curricula in all phases of education lag some number of years behind the world we live in. What we're teaching for in a curricula is usually a construct of a series of decisions that were fought over a number of years before, should we say maybe up to 50 years. And because then they're highly contested, it's very difficult to change those. And I think we probably have to accept that delay about education and think about how we make it responsive in spite of that, because it's how then, and it becomes apparent in the release of ChatGPT and people who see the opportunities in education, there's some big questions about what education is for. And I think this thing about memory and memorizing. So, in the traditions of education, when there's a single authority around the text, the memorization of that text is an awfully plausible way of measuring the success in understanding and recalling that text. But when you've got multiple perspectives to make sense of, it does become a much more noisy world in which you've got to understand the basis on which why am I memorizing that and why I'm making that selection in distinct. So you've got to have a kind of critical perspective on your own selection. But if you do that all the time, it's not a good place to be. So you have to get on with your life as well. So yes, I think memory remains important, but what clouds that is, the fact that it is so noisy now in the context of what students might have to learn. And I think that's why it's sympathetic. I'm sympathetic to people say, well, let's narrow it down a bit, if that's a kind of scaffolding way, and just limit and encourage them to see the practices of memorizing stuff to do a thing, but also be aware that the world they have to live in will be very dynamic and changing, and they have to be responsive to the changing understanding of what they do and what they need to know about what they do, but how also that has an impact on who they are as well. So these are very complex issues for education to contemplate.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think there's a perception that at the minute, a lot of education, particularly like secondary and probably university level education, is taught simply to ensure that the X country, it doesn't have to just be the UK, but this is every country of the world, performs well on the international rankings.
Yeah.
And it's not particularly what the students need to be taught.
Sure.
They're taught what's tested on and what's ranked. And I think, like you said, it's lagging 50, maybe 75 years.
Yeah. Oh, so I'm glad you think I'm being generous there, because I was thinking in front of educators, I sometimes think that might sounds as if I'm saying education is so conservative. But I agree, it lags along. There's things in there you think, why?
I think where AI comes in, and this is something that I think if you listen to the conversation and what you've been saying, I think really what you're saying overall is that AI is giving us a really good opportunity to maybe accelerate and make some of those jobs easier. Like it might help you save a lot of time in grading.
Yeah.
So you're not spending nights and weekends grading papers. You can actually get some assistance in the grading. So that actually frees you up to think more about what you should be telling students.
I think that's right. I completely agree with that. But that level just raises the game for everyone, doesn't it? So then you spend your evenings designing great prompts to help you do your work.
Yes, yeah.
And students are designing great prompts. So, I think that's right. But it does address those problems because we're operating a much more reflexive level about who we are and how we make sense of ourselves in society, and who knows where that will take us. But it solves the problems we have now of just this kind of hyper level of it doesn't solve the problem of hyper individualization. It just is a way of making that manageable. We want everything is increasingly personalized, for good or for bad, and that seems the progress forward. Whether we want very personalized products, very personalized things on the internet when we select. We want it to reflect who we are and who we are when we're living our best lives.
There's a danger in that as well. It's the bubble, that if you stay too much in your bubble, that you're not challenged with other ideas. And this is something that I think a lot of people see happening at the minute.
Yes.
If you look at places like Twitter and other social media platforms, you might Twitter is perceived as being very sort of, liberal and kind of left wing, whereas you've got other platforms that are right wing, and people start dividing themselves, and they don't expose themselves to those counter arguments, which is what university is about, or supposed to be, isn't it? It's about
I think it is. And one of the things that just talking to one or two peace educators and people thinking around, using Chat GPT to support in kind of mental health, is how you might reflect on your interpretation, other people's interpretations, to realize that you might be contradictory to them, but they might have good reasons for saying the things that they say. But you can always ask them not to say them to you. And so that's a very hopeful world. I was saying the other point we went fast over, and you might want to revisit that, is about the issue around standardization and PISA and international comparisons, and how that influences education. I mean, I think
we could probably do an entire podcast on just that.
We could. It's interesting. It is interesting. I mean, but there's a whole cycle of problems here in that the state or the government have to make decisions about what to do in education, and it's really impossible to know whether it's going to be a good thing or a bad thing. You might say, well, it's good, increased results, but that isn't a proxy for a better society. So the comparison becomes a way of importing and exporting practices to support political decision making, to give it some public legitimacy, even though that's very faint. But we have to think of different ways in which we might make decisions about education that are a bit more holistic and reflect, sort of global, but as well as the needs of communities which schools primarily help with in many ways, how it connects a community and experiences in a community with huge global issues. So that's a huge, huge demand. And, I'm not always sympathetic to politicians, but it's a hugely, hugely demanding situation. You can see how then the discourse of PISA, kind of influences these things, and also can then be used to support different approaches to education. Yes, we could talk about that at a greater length.
And I guess the other side is that, having worked with public sector a little bit myself, I also know that you can't please any of the people any of the time. So coming to some sort of an agreement, if we did say we need to change education, it's not fit for purpose for the modern world.
Yeah.
We're 50, 75 years behind. Trying to get anybody to agree on what
completely.
we need to do would be nearly impossible.
Yeah.
But I think I do think that over time it's gonna free up students and teachers as well to maybe address some other topics, like maybe talk a little bit more about mental health. Maybe talk a little bit more
I think
about,
so.
It's the critical thinking. I know some schools are already teaching classes on how to research information that they see on the internet to try and understand if it's real or not. And I think with the addition of AI into the mix, we're going to have to maybe introduce more of that, so that
completely,
maybe again, not in primary school, but maybe as kids get into secondary school, or for people in the US, like high school, when they're that sort of age, I think it's going to be important to start introducing how to research, how to understand, how to critically think.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's various terms, a much more holistic, transdisciplinary systems thinking to what it is to be an individual subject in modern society, and how to make sense of that. And one of the ways we've approached it is really through disciplinary knowledge around psychology, sociology, anthropology, philosophy. But you can't, for instance, the one thing that I was continue to work on is the problems of the distinction between psychology and sociology from this perspective, is the distinction between the individual and collective, and how you fit in. What are you in terms of what's your part in a whole, and how is it possible to be that part? And what does that mean in society, and how you make sense of that? So you can't just look at that from my own individual thoughts, because they're always connected to what's going on in society and around you, and being influenced by that. So it's how do you think beyond that, and think about how everything else is organized around that in the society you live at, and how to cope with that and remain, shall we say, healthy, or cope with ill health, or cope with the things that come along, and to try and assess in very non-simplistic terms what might be an appropriate decision on bigger issues. But all of those, just we end up with a lot more kind of nuanced. I think the approach, while we now accept that consensus, as you say, is unlikely, and that's how, affected politics quite dramatically, how we deal with contradiction is usually through trying to work out shared problems that need solving in quite practical ways, and immediate things, and many of those around communities. And I agree. And I see this kind of technology being able to empower a community to say, this is what, to generate content around their shared problem solving in order to be able to connect in with wider politics or society, media, and to draw in from expertise potentially, because they're able to generate content to support what they're doing and to articulate their decision-making processes locally.
When Woe was on, one of the things he said is, you pretty much need to just treat AI like it's just someone in the office, like it's that guy, right? At the minute, it sometimes it makes up stuff, but you can ask them questions and you can get help and support. So feeding off of what you were just saying, do you think then that is AI just going to become another member of society that we're just going to have to kind of deal with like it's a person?
I don't. I characterize it as not the guy in the office. I've heard students say it's like having the smart student on permanent, on WhatsApp permanently. Or for me, it's the guy in the pub who is great company, but makes up stories, and you just have to accept that he's going to make up lots of stories. But he'll always give you a good plausible response to whatever you say. But then from then, no, this is no more than an automatic pencil, really,
or a calculator.
It's just another communication tool. It is just a tool, and I think see it that way. It limits this kind of imaginary about this kind of intelligence that's there, and that I think is misleading in how you comprehend how to make use of it in creative ways. So to see it as a kind of very clever, it's like the ultimate, if you take Midjourney and ChatGPT all together, and ultimately with multimedia AI, you've got a very clever universal art device. It's like he'll produce in any media in any form in any genre or anything of this, and all that's it's you as the creator decide what you're going to do with that, what you want it to do, really.
Yeah. I know advertisers are using it, and they can create things like, in the past, they would create maybe 4 or 5 videos that were targeted to different audiences. Now they can create 10,000.
Yeah.
And they can, in a matter of minutes, and they can target those at very, very specific
that's
markets. And it saves them time and money.
And this is where, the power of persuasion of advertising has been incredible. It's just another aspect of the media. It's been incredible and increasingly persuasive. I grew up with the birth of TV advertising and how entertaining that was and how creative that was. But the increasing level of personalization and targeting requires people to be able to reflect beyond those messages. We can't control them. We won't be able to control them, but we'll be able to say, do you know why this is so persuasive? Because it's aimed at you. So don't believe it. You make the decision. You have to make the decision here, but don't, knowing that it's designed to persuade you to buy this. Now, raise, issues of trust there. It's not your friend. This is somebody wanting to sell something. And I think that's quite hard because, in a fragmented world, people can get very lured in to, it was the shopping channels. I've watched them when they first started and how persuasive they become, and then entice people in through generating what seemed to be personal dialogue. Even if it's you not phoning in, you relate to that person. But this advances that even more in a more sophisticated way. And how we regulate that in a reasonable way. I think it's unreasonable just to say, don't allow it, because that kind of stifles innovation. People have to understand what's happening and it has to be regulated in a responsible, nuanced way rather than just say, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's not my area of
That's
regulation.
going to be the challenge.
It is going to be the challenge.
That's going to be the challenge, is understanding what's real and what's not. And I know there's some tools out there at the minute that, you can use to try and estimate whether something was written by AI or not. But I'm already getting feedback from authors who are saying that their clients are running it on content that was written 3-4 years ago, and it's saying it was written by AI, and the tools didn't even exist then.
Yeah, there is no reliable way, because there's a basic, it's basically not copying anything, so you've got no reference point.
Exactly.
It's just the most likely next word in a much more sophisticated assessment of what the meaning is. So any claim to see it, and I've had people say, "Oh, I recognise that from Wikipedia," and I think, maybe I've never seen that. I've never. It does it does repeat stuff irritatingly, like it's obsessed with the word delve at the moment for me, and
therefore,
and there's other things. So many of my problems include do not use the word delve or multifaceted.
Apparently, two of the main ways they can figure it out. One is about the density of information. AI writes very dense material, and that's one way, because most people don't write that way. But any professional writers, anyone that's sort of higher level education, your PhD students, your master's degree students, and things like that, they will write, because educational writing is different.
Yeah, it is.
And so those rules don't work. But another really funny one is that when you do quotes, AI tends to use straight quotes instead of curly quotes.
Okay.
And so that's one really easy way to identify it, is if it has straight quotes in it. So I learned that. I take content very frequently and put it into Grammarly and sort of check everything to make sure that the grammar seems to be okay. And one of the things, if I've used any AI content at all, or I've had it go back and correct my stuff, it picks up on the difference in the quotes, and it will say, do you want to use curly quotes or straight quotes?
Right, okay,
so I always go back to curly quotes. But there you go. There's a top tip.
Yeah, it's pretty limited. It's pretty limited. Yeah, okay.
Again, I'm conscious of time. We're almost at an hour.
Yeah,
we could probably talk for a whole
we could.
Hour.
It's been absolutely fascinating, because you do ask great questions, and I realise that I'm trying to write something longer about some of these ideas at the moment, with the help of ChatGPT at the moment. But
of course,
so it's really helpful to talk through some of these ideas, and
Well, thanks very much for coming on. Do you have any last words?
No, I think we've exhausted ourselves today. So I hope if there's another chance, we can have another conversation.
100%. Steve, thank you very much for coming on the show, and we will speak to you another time.
Thank you, David. Bye.
Okay, folks, that's a wrap on another amazing episode of Creatives with AI. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. If you want to stay up to date on how all things related to AI is impacting the creative industries, then be sure to subscribe to the podcast on whatever your favorite platform is. We're on them all. And follow us on social media. We're on mainly Twitter and LinkedIn, but we're the same handle everywhere, which is @Creatives with AI. We'd also really appreciate it if you could just take a minute to leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Those are our two main platforms, and it really helps other listeners find the show, and it also helps us get more popularity and more exposure. So it'd be amazing if you could help us with that. If you've got any questions, topic suggestions, guest recommendations, feel free to send us an email. The best email is hello@creativeswith.ai, or you can shoot us a message on social media. Either one is fine. We love hearing from all of you, and we can't wait to bring more exciting episodes in the future. And the best way we can do that is to get feedback from the audience and have the audience tell us who it is you'd like to hear from and what things you'd like us to ask and what topics you'd like us to talk about. So please use that. Let us know what you want to hear, and we'll do our best to get it for you. And last but not least, we'd like to give a shout out to our sponsor, Futurehand Limited, who make this podcast possible. Your support means the world to us, and we really appreciate it. So thanks very much. That's it for today. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay curious.